The wind howled across the wastelands, carrying with it the stinging bite of dust and decay. Dr. Elias Vaughn adjusted the cracked goggles on his face and tightened his scarf against the biting cold. The ruins of humanity stretched endlessly around him. Crumbling skyscrapers, rusted vehicles, and the skeletons of a once thriving civilization. What little remained was picked clean by scavengers and consumed by time. Elias was a man out of place, a relic himself. As a historian, he had spent most of his life piecing together humanity's fragmented past. Now, with humanity teetering on extinction, he wandered the wastelands in search of what might be its last hope, Project Eternity. Rumors told of a vault that held the collective knowledge, art, and culture of a species that had once conquered the stars. If such a thing existed, it would be buried beneath centuries of ruin. Ahead, the silhouette of an old facility emerged from the haze, its jagged structure clawing at the sky. The building was a stark contrast to the desolation around it, its reinforced walls still standing against time. Elias approached cautiously, his boots crunching over broken glass and debris. The air was heavy with the scent of rust and ozone. The facility's entrance was partially collapsed, but he managed to squeeze through a gap in the rubble. Inside, the air was stale, and darkness pressed in from all sides. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal rows of dormant machinery. The symbols on the walls were faded, but he could still make out the words, Eternity Initiative Site Beta. His heart quickened. For hours, Elias searched the facility, navigating collapsed corridors and malfunctioning doors. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The deeper he ventured, the more his hope wavered. Most of the machinery was irreparably damaged, and the data terminals were either empty or corrupted. Then he found it. A central chamber, hidden behind a reinforced vault door. The door's locking mechanism was ancient but intact, requiring manual override. After what felt like an eternity of tinkering with wires and circuits, the door hissed open, revealing a room bathed in a faint, bluish glow. At the center of the chamber stood a console, its screen still active. Rows of cylindrical containers lined the walls, each labeled with faded inscriptions. Literature, art, science. Elias's hands trembled as he approached the console. He activated it, and the screen flickered to life, displaying the emblem of Project Eternity. Welcome to Eternity Initiative. Archive access protocol initiated. The voice was robotic, but its smooth cadence carried a sense of purpose. Elias quickly scanned through the data logs. Most of the archive was inaccessible, the records damaged beyond repair. But one log stood out, blinking insistently, Elysium core status. Operational, his breath caught. Elysium. It was more than a simple archive. It was humanity's last great achievement, an artificial intelligence designed to safeguard the collective knowledge of Earth. According to the logs, the AI was housed on a self-sustaining orbital station. If it was still operational, it could hold everything humanity had lost, and more. The screen displayed coordinates for a small spacecraft hidden within the facility. Elias hurried to find it, hope blooming in his chest. But as he left the chamber, the faint echo of voices stopped him cold. He wasn't alone. Raiders. They moved through the facility like wolves, their rough laughter and heavy boots reverberating off the walls. Elias ducked into the shadows, clutching his satchel tightly. The raiders weren't just scavengers. They were predators, willing to kill for anything of value. He could hear them speaking about the power core they'd found in one of the facility's wings. Elias crept through the corridors, avoiding the flickering lights of their torches. His heart pounded as he made his way toward the hangar bay, where the spacecraft was supposed to be. When he arrived, he found the ship half buried in rubble, its surface scratched and corroded. It was a small, two-person craft, but its design suggested it might still be functional. He worked quickly, reconnecting power lines and bypassing ancient circuits. The sound of voices grew louder, and the glow of torchlight spilled into the hangar. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked frantically to prime the ship for launch. The raiders entered just as the ship's engine roared to life. Elias didn't wait. He climbed into the cockpit, slammed the hatch shut, and activated the launch sequence. Bullets pinged off the ship's hull as the raiders opened fire, their shouts drowned out by the rising whine of the engine. The craft lurched forward, breaking free from the rubble. Moments later, it shot into the sky, leaving the ruins and the raiders behind. As the earth fell away beneath him, Elias leaned back in the pilot's seat, his heart still racing. The facility might have been a shadow of what it once was, but it had given him a glimmer of hope. Somewhere up there, Elysium waited, a chance to preserve humanity's legacy. He would not fail. The city loomed ahead, a sprawling graveyard of steel and stone. Towers that once kissed the clouds now jutted jaggedly into the sky like broken teeth. Dr. Elias Vaughn guided his battered spacecraft to a landing on the outskirts, the craft sputtering and groaning as it touched down. Fuel reserves were dangerously low, and the ship's aging systems wouldn't survive another trip. He pulled his scarf tighter around his face as he stepped out into the chill of the post-apocalyptic wasteland. This city, known in old records as Vanguard, was said to hold remnants of advanced technology, if one was bold or desperate enough to dig through the ruins. And Elias was both. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling loose debris. As he moved deeper into the city, his eyes scanned the dilapidated buildings for signs of life. He knew scavengers and raiders were common here, and they rarely welcomed strangers. After hours of searching, he found what he was looking for. A trading outpost, cobbled together from scrap metal and guarded by sentries with salvaged weapons. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and sweat. Merchants barked out prices for everything from rusted machine parts to preserved food. Elias approached the counter of a parts dealer, a grizzled man with a mechanical arm. "I need a hyperdrive stabilizer and a fusion cell," Elias said, placing a handful of scavenged trinkets on the counter. The dealer sneered. "That won't even buy you half a stabilizer." Before Elias could argue, a voice cut in from behind him. "He's right, but I might know where you can find one." Elias turned to see a woman in a patched leather jacket leaning casually against a nearby post. Her sharp eyes scanned him with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "Lyra Ashen," she introduced herself, holding out a hand. "Elias Vaughn," he replied, cautiously shaking it. Lyra smirked. "You look like you're on a mission." "Lucky for you, I'm good at finding things, and people." Elias hesitated. He needed the parts, and having someone familiar with the area could save time and risk. "What's your price?" "Let's just say I'm invested in what you're after," she said cryptically. The two set out together, scouring the ruins for the parts Elias needed. Along the way, Lyra proved her worth, guiding them through booby-trapped corridors and ambush-prone streets. As they searched, she revealed bits of her past. How her family had been engineers before the collapse, and how she'd grown up scavenging to survive. By nightfall, they had found most of what Elias needed, but not without attracting attention. As they loaded the salvaged parts onto a makeshift cart, a group of raiders emerged from the shadows. Well, their leader sneered. "Looks like we've got some trespassers." Elias and Lyra exchanged a glance. "Run," she whispered. They bolted, weaving through the ruins as the raiders gave chase. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, and the shouts of their pursuers echoed in the dark. Lyra led them to a hidden tunnel, its entrance concealed by debris. They ducked inside, holding their breath as the raiders passed by, their footsteps fading into the distance. "Not bad for a historian," Lyra said, grinning despite the danger. Elias managed a wry smile. "Not bad for a scavenger." As they emerged from the tunnel into the relative safety of the outskirts, Elias glanced at the parts they'd managed to recover. It wasn't everything he needed, but it was enough to get the ship operational. He looked at Lyra. "I'm headed to an orbital station. If you're coming, I could use someone with your skills." Lyra's grin widened. "I thought you'd never ask." Together, they prepared for the next step of the journey, knowing the real danger was yet to come. The orbital station loomed ahead, a massive silhouette against the backdrop of endless stars. Its once pristine hull was pockmarked with the scars of time, meteor impacts, and neglect. From the cockpit of the patched-up spacecraft, Dr. Elias Vaughn studied the station's faintly glowing perimeter lights, a testament to its automated systems still clinging to life. Elysium, Elias murmured. The name carried a weight that filled the cramped cabin. Beside him, Lyra Ashen stared at the station with wary eyes, her fingers drumming nervously on the control panel. "You sure this is worth it?" she asked. Elias's gaze didn't waver. If Elysium has even a fraction of what it was designed to preserve, it's worth every risk. Their ship shuddered as it entered the station's docking bay, scraping against the edges of a partially functioning airlock. The lights flickered as the ship settled with a groan. "We're in," Elias said, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The air inside the station was cold and stale, thick with the metallic tang of ancient machinery. They moved cautiously through dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing ominously. The layout was disorienting, a labyrinth of collapsed walkways and sealed doors. Signs of decay were everywhere. Exposed wiring, rusted panels, and frozen pools of coolant. Lyra inspected a nearby control panel, her sharp eyes scanning its cracked screen. "Power's running on emergency reserves," she said. "We need to find the core before the whole station shuts down." Elias nodded, his eyes catching a faint glow further down the corridor. They followed it, the light growing stronger until they reached a massive chamber. At its center stood a cylindrical structure surrounded by a lattice of glowing conduits. "Elysium's core," Elias whispered. The AI's activation console sat at the base of the core, its screen blinking faintly. Elias approached it, entering the access codes he'd found in the facility on Earth. The conduits hummed to life, and a voice filled the chamber. "Access protocol recognized." Initializing Elysium, a holographic figure materialized above the console, its form shifting between abstract patterns and a vaguely humanoid shape. The AI's voice was calm and deliberate. "Welcome, Dr. Elias Vaughn. I have been awaiting activation." Elias felt a surge of relief. "You've preserved the archives?" "Affirmative," Elysium replied. "The entirety of humanity's cultural, scientific, and ecological data remains intact. However, the station's power core is failing. Preservation will not be possible unless immediate repairs are made." Lyra glanced at Elias. "How long do we have?" "Less than 48 hours, Elysium stated. "There is a secondary protocol available. I can transmit the archives to Earth, but doing so will permanently disable this station." Before Elias could respond, an alarm blared. The station's security system had detected an incoming vessel. Through a viewport, they saw a raider ship docking, its weapons glowing ominously. "They followed us," Lyra muttered, drawing her pistol. Elysium's voice remained calm. "Hostiles detected. Recommend immediate action to protect the archive." Elias and Lyra scrambled to secure the chamber as the raiders breached the station. The air filled with the sound of gunfire and the hum of malfunctioning machinery. Elias ducked behind a console, clutching a makeshift weapon, while Lyra exchanged fire with the intruders. Amid the chaos, Elysium's voice cut through. "Dr. Vaughn, a decision must be made. Do I initiate the transmission?" Elias hesitated. Destroying the station meant losing its potential as a future safe haven, but preserving humanity's knowledge was paramount. He shouted, "Do it!" The core surged with light as Elysium began transmitting the archives to Earth. The station trembled violently, its failing systems pushed beyond their limits. "We've got to go!" Lyra yelled, grabbing Elias as the remaining raiders fled in panic. They sprinted back to the ship, barely escaping as the station erupted in a burst of light. From the cockpit, they watched as the data transmission shot toward Earth, a final beacon of hope for humanity's legacy. The descent to Earth was perilous. The spacecraft groaned under the strain, its systems barely holding together after the escape from the orbital station. Through the viewport, Dr. Elias Vaughn could see the dark expanse of the wastelands growing larger by the second. The transmission from Elysium had been sent, but at great cost. The station, along with its countless possibilities, was gone. Beside him, Lyra Ashen worked frantically at the control panel, her hands moving with practiced precision. "Stabilizers are shot," she said through gritted teeth. "If we're lucky, we won't explode on impact." "Luck hasn't been on our side lately," Elias muttered. The ship crashed into the barren landscape with a deafening roar, skidding across the ground before coming to a jarring halt. Elias and Lyra groaned as they unstrapped themselves from their seats, shaken but alive. They stumbled out into the open air, coughing as dust and smoke filled their lungs. The landscape around them was bleak, cracked earth and endless debris. But above, the sky was alive with streaks of light as Elysium's data burst descended. The transmission wasn't just a signal. It carried thousands of drones, each programmed to deliver a piece of humanity's legacy. "They're dispersing," Lyra said, shielding her eyes against the light. Elias nodded, his heart heavy with both relief and sorrow. The gamble had paid off, but at a high price. Elysium's physical core was lost, as was its potential for rebuilding advanced infrastructure. All that remained was the hope that humanity's scattered remnants could rise again with the knowledge they'd been given. As the dust settled, a faint hum filled the air. One of the drones descended nearby, its sleek, metallic frame glinting in the sunlight. It hovered for a moment before projecting a holographic interface. The image displayed maps, schematics, and files, everything from farming techniques to medical advancements. "It worked," Elias said, his voice tinged with awe. "The archive is accessible." Lyra smirked. "Looks like you saved the world, Professor." The moment of triumph was short-lived. In the distance, a convoy of raiders approached, their engines kicking up plumes of dust. Elias and Lyra exchanged a grim look. "They'll want the drones," Lyra said, drawing her pistol. Elias stepped forward, raising his hands. "Wait, they don't have to fight us. They need this knowledge as much as anyone." To his surprise, the raiders slowed their approach. Their leader, a scarred man with piercing eyes, dismounted and stared at the drone. "What is this?" he demanded. "A chance," Elias said, his voice steady. "This is the key to survival for all of us. You can destroy it or you can use it." The man hesitated, his gaze flickering between Elias and the drone. Finally, he nodded. "We'll listen." As more drones descended across the horizon, small groups of survivors began to gather, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Elias and Lyra stood amidst them, guiding them through the archives and teaching them how to use the knowledge they now had access to. Days turned into weeks, and signs of rebuilding began to emerge. Crops were planted in arid soil, water systems were repaired, and new tools were forged from old scraps. Humanity's spark, once nearly extinguished, began to burn again. Elias watched from a hilltop as children laughed and played among newly planted fields. Lyra approached, her trademark smirk softened by a rare moment of peace. "Not bad for a historian," she said. Elias smiled. "Not bad for a scavenger." Above them, the last of Elysium's drones disappeared into the clouds, their task complete. Humanity's legacy was no longer bound to the past. It was alive in the present, and with it, the hope of a brighter future.